Very good morning to everybody. We have the privilege and pleasure of having Mr. N. Venkatraman, Senior Advocate, Additional Solicitor General of India, to address us in this very special Sunday morning session. I now invite Mrs. Hemalata, Advocate, to give the introduction and welcome address for the session.
Warm and pleasant greetings to one and all. It's my honor and privilege to be welcoming a distinguished speaker for today, learned Additional Solicitor General, Mr. N. Venkatraman, and fondly known as NV among the legal fraternity. Needs no introduction as such, but I have to say a few words about him. Mr. NV hails from Madurai. He completed his law degree in the first batch of 5-year integrated law course at Madurai Law College in 1989. Ever since his enrollment in 1989, NV has been on the rise. Many feathers adorn his cap. At the age of 39, NV was designated as a senior advocate by the Madras High Court. His area was of expertise is multifarious. Recently, he has been appointed as one of the ASG to the Supreme Court of India. He is a gold medalist in a lot of extracurricular activities. He is a trained classical singer. He is one of the best motivational speaker. He is a staunch devotee of Sringeri Acharya. His religious discourse are rich in content. We all know that NV is a philanthropist and do a lot of charities without publicity. We also owe our immense gratitude to you, sir, for accepting to address us today. In spite of your grueling schedule, I'll welcome you, sir. I welcome all the honorable judges, past and present, senior advocates, friends, and participants in the legal landscape of this country. I welcome one and all again from the bottom of the heart. I welcome you, sir. I welcome you all. Thank you.
Sharada Sharadamboja Vadana Vadanambujai Sarvata Sarvata Smakam Sannithim Kriyat. My humble pranams to all the judges of our High Court, judges who are in the session, both present and the past, senior advocates, and my dear colleagues. It's an immense pleasure to always talk to all of you. And thanks to Om Prakash, who said I should be here on this Sunday to share whatever little I know about the subject which is taken up for introspection. Let me put one caveat straight. When all of you saw the title, Article 21, many would be surprised to possibly presume this guy has not touched one case in criminal law and how dare he chooses to speak on 21. Therefore, what we have done, we have compartmentalized Article 21 into 3 broad verticals. The due process and procedure established by law is one vertical, which deals with 20, 21, and 22, which has already been presented by various judges, various senior counsels who had mastered this area. There is a second vertical where how does Supreme Court deal with Article 21 and the various directive principles of state policy spread over between, say, Article 38 to, it starts from 34, but 38 to 48. Many of them have now become fundamental rights. So on what basis this transition has happened? That's the second vertical, which possibly something which we can deal with. And the last vertical is about privacy. Puttaswamy's judgment, 9 judges and later Aadhar, and how privacy has thrown open a large door. You can say the largest door. See, we have all along been concentrating. There are 2 basic expressions in 21, right to life and personal liberty. In fact, the adjective personal liberty is very important. Personal. It's not just liberty, it is personal liberty. Because the CAD very clearly says the original thought was to have only liberty. But they said that if you put only liberty, then even Essential Commodities Act will come under challenge. So they have coined the word personal liberty. We have all along been discussing more about right to life. But right to privacy has thrown open a new avenue in expanding the expression and principle personal liberty. Personal liberty, according to Supreme Court, comprises of two parts, dignity and liberty, which should converge in autonomy. So how this personal liberty has created new avatars before the Supreme Court in the form of euthanasia, the LGBT rights, and the decriminalization of adultery. It's all rooted ultimately to liberties, dignity, and personal liberty. Therefore, what I thought, Jambavans have already dealt with 2020, 21, and 22. You have several YouTube lectures. Stalwarts have spoken about it. So let me give a skip to it and concentrate on the later two parts of Article 21, with your leave. And before we venture to discuss the later two parts, I thought it's also good to see the uniqueness of Article 21, because that's the topic, and it is indeed unique. It is unique for several reasons, some of which has been catalogued in the slideshow. The first reason is you can suspend all the fundamental rights during emergency except 20 and 21. So it always is available. And there are several judgments from 1950 which says a foreigner has no other fundamental right to claim except Article 21. And two, it's an ever expanding and penetrative article in the Constitution, ever expanding. It's like a balloon, just goes on and on and on. Several things could be brought within it. But what courts have always told the line is, they have said, don't think we are rewriting Article 21 or amending Article 21 through our judicial interpretations. Courts have been very careful in saying all this is inherent to Article 21, and we are slowly discerning one after the other when issues crop up before them for a decision. So 21 is such a huge basket that you can peel out as many things as you can as the law keeps progressing for debate and contemplation. And the fourth aspect is social justice to common man. This is public interest litigation. The foundation of public interest litigation is fairly traceable to Article 21. And courts have said victims of lawlessness, social oppression, and people who have been denied basic constitutional rights now have an avenue under 21 to approach the court for redressal. Now, more importantly, the second bullet is very, very important. It says, when can our constitution be held so sound? It can be held so sound only when Article 21 principles are well laid out and 21 principles are followed. To call yourself a constitutional democracy, then it has to pass through the filter of Article 21. That's one, again, a unique feature of where your law should protect you. If your laws don't protect you, then court should protect you to say, declare that the laws which do not protect you needs to be declared null and void. This is the quintessence which courts have read into Article 21. And again, Article 21 has given birth to this. Constitution applies left, right, and center to everybody. To every citizen is entitled to his constitutional rights. And therefore, the question of a minuscule minority or a majority just does not survive the test, because this has to function and be made available to one and all. Looks to be the essence. Now, due process, I'll just touch only one aspect, and rest is all done by, as I said, stalwarts. There was always a debate whether we should have due process in our constitution. It was deliberately avoided because at that point of time, due process was an origin of through the American US Constitution, and which had gave uncapped, unlimited power to the judiciary, which possibly the lawmakers did not want to do, and therefore they have put the expression procedure established by law, which Supreme Court has interpreted. Law does not mean natural law. Law can only mean legislations. But over a period of time, after especially post Menaka Gandhi and Minerva Mills, Supreme Court has made it clear, even procedure laid down by law has to be reasonable, fair, just, and not arbitrary. Therefore, now giving the power of judicial review and empowering the courts to declare what is not sound in law or in procedure, substantive or procedural, can be declared void or inapplicable, as the case may be. And therefore, the expression whether it is due process or procedure established by law does not materially matter after 72 years for us. Now, if you take part 2, this is very important. Look at these articles. Talks about promotion of people, talks about equality of men and women in livelihood, right to work, right to education, right to public assistance, and provision for early child care, nutrition, and protection of environment. Just if you read this part 4 of the Constitution 20 years back, you will be surprised. There will be no judgments by any court declaring any of these as a fundamental right. Because the traction has always been what is fundamental right and what is directive principles of state policies. The first classical test is from the Champakam judgment, which says part 3 is justiciable and enforceable, whereas part 4 is not. It all started with that. So what happened if you maintain, the question that came before courts quite often was, if you try to maintain an airtight compartment between part 3 and part 4, will it be good for a progressive transformative constitution? Or you must make it into a homogeneous pack, one dependent on the other. Was the issue that has cropped up. In fact, I'll leave the slideshow with Om Prakash. Whoever is interested can take it from him. I don't want to go one case after the other because that will become like a classroom teaching. About 10, 15 case laws we have cataloged. All of them in unison have expressed the view that they must be read as a homogeneous whole. One is not inferior or subservient to the other. But if you look at the assumption of the constitutional makers who drew the law, see, it looks like part 4 is something, an obligation on a state to perform certain duties. But part 3 is mandatory rights which a citizen can enforce. Maybe at that point of time, abilities, resource crunch, several factors. In fact, they do discuss it in a couple of such judgments also, to say that these limitations possibly made the constitutional makers to draw some of the subjects into part 4, so that state as a welfare state, as an objective state to ensure people, its people are happy, can progressively think and implement all these schemes over a period of time. But courts took over it, and courts started to interpret that. For example, if we take Minerva Mills, it says, together comprise the core of the Constitution, part 3 and part 4. And any legislation or amendment that destroyed the balance between the two would be in contravention to the basic structure. So the idea that they should be left in silos has been opposed consistently by judiciary. And they have said that you should coalesce and you should ensure that one works in conjunction with the other. Now, now you will see Unikrishnan, which is a very important judgment on the right to education. Volga Tellis, right to livelihood. Now, you will see these 8 judgments as samples. Right to livelihood, right to shelter, live with human dignity, health and medical assistance, right to education, free legal aid, and pollution-free environment. We just saw, if I can take you back a couple of slides back, see, environment is under Article 48A. All these judgments have, over a period of time, transitioned what was contemplated as directive principles as a fundamental right. And all these judgments have traced its source to Article 21 as right to life. And they said, Supreme Court said, right to life does not mean a life. Right to life does not mean simply an animal existence. Right to life means human dignity. Right to life means shelter. Right to life means food. Right to life means health. Right to life means education. So this has been a huge transition, a very progressive transition by the Supreme Court over the last 30, 40 years. So this second part will be the foundation for me to launch the third part on privacy. Because privacy is a new avatar which is hardly 5-7 years old. So a law student or even a practicing lawyer can often get that doubt in his mind. How did privacy occupy such a center stage in the Indian judicial panoramic view when it was nowhere found anywhere, even in traces? Even though it all was started arguing from Gopalan's case, Karak Singh's case, and MP Sharma's case, where they have discussed about privacy. But all these judgments have not approved it as a fundamental right. And therefore, it was always on the back burner. And it rose to prominence after Puttaswamy in 2014-15. Therefore, 2016. Therefore, what is important now is we must understand the topic suggested by Om, uniqueness of Article 21. I think he has thought over it well to coin this terminology, uniqueness. Yes, Article 21 is unique. It has empowered the courts to integrate, coalesce Part 4 with Part 3 and expand the expression right to life. Now we go to the third section, personal liberty. The confusion that many had at in the anterior stages of progression is, you have some fundamental rights under 19, freedom of speech, freedom to do trade and all. And you're talking about right to life and also liberty, personal liberty in 21. So is there an overlap? Or is it a duplication? And therefore, whether Article 21 is nothing but a replication and therefore should be resiled and prominence should be given to 19. This was one discussion that happened through several judgments. And these are the earlier points of time where they have tried to say that there is an overlap, one is independent, one is better and all. But finally, Puttaswamy 9 judges have concluded, the last bullet is very important. They have said that both will stay together and both cannot nullify each other. If you have passed a procedure, a law which is procedural compliant under 21, does not mean it therefore satisfy Article 19. It still has to pass the filters of 19.2 to 19.6. And as far as a legislation, if tested on their fundamental rights enshrined in 19. So equal prominence has been given. One was not considered nullifying the other, nor one was considered to be a residuary. They did not say, it was all in initial thinking, whether Article 21 can be called as a residue of Article 19. Puttaswamy says, no. Both are prominent articles and both have their own independent features to stay on course. This is a very, very important milestone direction given to Article 21 for it to always remain elastic, for it to always remain broad-based, and for it to always remain penetrative, and for it to remain very focused. These are the possible formulations we keep seeing as we read more and more judgments under Article 21. This again, they take it up. This is a continuation of the 21-19 conflict, but they have said ultimately that both will stay on course. Right. This is what privacy starts from here. Court said, when you say right to life, it is not mere animal existence. It is not physical survival. And see the list, what human dignity can. All this is now enshrined to be a fundamental right, many of which were in the DPSP. Nutrition, clothing, shelter, reading, writing, expressing. And it says any act which offends against or impairs human dignity is against the right to live. So dignity, liberty started to occupy the center stage in the last 6-7 years, and the law relating to personal liberty has been redesigned. Now in Puttaswamy, this is exactly what they say about privacy. What are the areas where an individual has a right of privacy? What do you mean by privacy? His choice, his autonomy, and more than anything else, being left alone. And these are the 6 important areas which the court have identified: marriage, procreation, family life, dignity, pursuit of happiness, and more importantly, because there was again a debate when privacy, this was what happened in Karak Singh, in MP Sharma, in A.K. Gopal and all, because they all said, we don't find the expression privacy anywhere in 21. That was the struggle at that point of time for the courts to declare privacy as a fundamental right. And therefore, Puttaswamy now says, look here, privacy is not a common law right. It is a constitutional right. And in fact, goes one step further. It says it's an inalienable right acquired by every human being the moment he or she is born. The moment you are born, comes along with it this inalienable right of privacy. This is to this extent they have taken privacy. We should see the progression and also a couple of cautions from a tradition and a cultural point of view, which we will touch upon it at the end of the session. So these, they have took specific, they were not general. They were specific as to how privacy can be shaped into a doctrine. It was a doctrinal approach giving rise to these 6 items. Now, these are the final conclusions. Therefore, they very clearly said, in fact, it should be Article 19, not 23. Sorry, we'll change it and give it to you. So this slide is important for this aspect. Judges who have authored minority judgments, there is a solace through these slides, these 2 slides. It's interesting to see the minority view of A.K. Gopalan, Karak Singh, and of course MP Sharma became the majority view in Puttaswamy. So it's not that two things are very clear in our Indian judiciary. A judge wants to express dissent, then he is not only free to do, he has a duty to do, or she has a duty to do. Because a dissent opinion is as valuable as a majority opinion is. One. And two, it may be a dissent opinion today, but it need not be a dissent opinion forever. And these three classic judgments on this issue is a live example where a 1950 A.K. Gopalan judgment and the later Karak Singh and MP Sharma were overturned after 50 years, saying that the minority view appears to be the correct law. And therefore, the third bullet is important. Life and personal liberty are inalienable rights and inseparable for a dignified human existence. So they keep expanding this horizon or theory in a very, very big way. And this is what it finally concludes. The last bullet is very important, which we may deliberate finally for about 5 minutes. Privacy includes at its core the preservation of personal intimacies, the sanctity of family life, marriage, procreation, home, and sexual orientation. So, the Puttaswamy 9 judges judgment, finally, there is a consensus or opinion of all the judges on these three important bullets, which is captured in the law as a last paragraph. They have said, whenever there is a law which poses orientation or a control over a right under Article 21, then that law should pass these three filters: legality, which postulates the existence of the law; the need defined in terms of the legitimate state aim; and the proportionality, which ensures a rational nexus between the objects and the means adopted to achieve them. In fact, in Puttaswamy, the court goes to this extent to say, whenever there is a challenge under Article 21, two things are pitted against each other: the obligation or a duty of the state to impose a law, and the guarantees given to an individual in terms of right to life and personal liberty. So, when both are pitted against each other, which should outweigh in what manner? This is a very important aspect which makes, again, Article 21 very, very unique. You know what Supreme Court has finally concluded? They said, doesn't matter. We are not going to be bogged down by law. Unless otherwise, it addresses why these guarantees needs to be interfered with. Law will take a backseat. Personal guarantees will dominate, because that is how we should interpret Constitution. Only then we can give life to the expression right to live and personal liberty. So it is not enough, as in all the constitutional validity, all that, now that I'm also a law officer, I will have to stand up and say and defend, saying this is reasonable, this is acceptable. That's a good defense. But something to pass through Article 21 does not look to be a good defense, because the court still want to verify the guarantees enshrined. If it has to be interfered with, then these three tests or these three filters needs to be passed. Now, this right to privacy has led to the deliverance of three important judgments by the Supreme Court Constitutional Bench. One is whether right to live includes right to die. So it only obligates a positive right to live. So do I have a right to die? That's the question. And the second is, when it comes to right to live with dignity, sexual orientation, whether it is a social stigma, and how do you address it? You have legislations which are statutory in nature, but you have a constitutional right under Article 21. So when you superscope it with Article 21 or telescope it through Article 21, how do you read sexual orientation rights? Is it a right or a stigma? That's the second issue. And third, decriminalization of adultery. Why did they decriminalize it? The way they went about to say adultery is a civil offense and may lead to a divorce, but it needs to be decriminalized. The reason for decriminalizing, what was the basis for them? All these three are finally traceable to the Puttaswamy doctrine of right to privacy. It all finally negotiates itself and puts themselves into the basket called privacy. Let's take euthanasia. See, different countries have different views about euthanasia. It's again a progressive. The difficulty is this: when I went through these judgments, what transpired ran in my mind as a lawyer. I want to share it with my lawyer friends. When people are old and well resourced, then the family or people who are interested in the wealth will go after the lawyer. But now, euthanasia, whether the scales will tilt and people will start chasing the doctor. That's the concern these judgments throw open. Therefore, because life is so precious and no one has a right to remove life except in accordance with law. See, even scriptures say a lot about it. You can give up anything, but you should not give up life. In fact, scriptures say, if there is one exception, somebody can lie. If somebody has to utter a falsehood, the only exception given is, if it is going to save the life of a human being, then you are entitled to utter a falsehood because life is so precious. So if that is so, then can we now infuse the right to die? But the same scriptures also give you exceptions. Right to life is precious, but somebody has to fight a battle in the battle war front. Is he entitled to kill the opponent? Same scripture says it is your duty to kill him because you have to defend your sovereign territory. So dharma changes from, it is contextual. You can't have one universal application. Right? Protect life is your duty, but you have to fight and kill somebody who is going to fight against you. And that's why possibly our laws also conceive self-defense as a possible mechanism, as embedded into our laws. It's all completely structured. Now coming to right to die. Now, this is exactly the Indian view. See how they have categorized death. These 5 categories is very interesting. If somebody is made to die involuntarily against his or her will, then it is not euthanasia. It is actually murder or killing. So involuntary, that's a test. Now, okay, it is not involuntary, but non-voluntary. Somebody is silent. Doesn't say yes or no. So can you kill? Can you ensure that the life comes to an end? Can a doctor do that? Non-voluntary is also killing. So what is so free from doubt is, if a patient, he or she, voluntarily requests, there's a procedure which I'll show it to you a little later, then that is available to a doctor to act upon. And when there is a voluntary request, here again there are 2 subsects to it, whether it is active or whether it is passive. That is where the role of a doctor comes into play. The difference between active and passive euthanasia is, in active euthanasia, the doctor actually accelerates death, which is impermissible according to courts. Whereas a passive euthanasia, where the test, I'm going to show you the test, where the conditions are such, the patient has no other choice but to die. But if you give treatment, the patient will continue to live, just ebbing and just waiting to die. At that point of time, omission to extend medical help will not be an offense. That falls within passive euthanasia. And the principle the doctrinal approach they say is, of course, one is sanctity of life. Nobody can take one's life. But what is important under Article 21 is not just the sanctity, but the quality of life. So when you're going to be a vegetable and a nuisance to rest of your own kin, should you continue to exist a life of no use? Or do you have the right to terminate it? Now, the courts have framed a principle called the best interest principle. And what does it mean? It is a self-determination made by the patient. And if doctor is satisfied that the illness is incurable and there is no hope for recovery, if this is made clear to the patient and the patient chooses to exercise the right to get him or herself killed, ready to die, then the doctor is actually doing a favor to the patient in his or her best interest. So, India, again, Supreme Court considered three important aspects. If you take such a decision, is it socially acceptable, medically ethical, and what happens to state? When can state is a guardian of our lives? So what happens to state interest? So it has to pass through these three filters. Before you establish it as a right under 21, you need to pass through these three filters. And this is what Supreme Court says. When somebody is in an incurable stage and there is no hope for any treatment, then a passive euthanasia is something recognized by law because it is forming part of the right to dignity, a right to life with dignity. It is not enough if you just live. As they said, right to life is not mere animal existence. Similarly, right to life includes right to live with dignity. And when you're not going to live with dignity, you are entitled to exercise the option of passive euthanasia. And when you exercise that right, then all the three gets cancelled. You can't say it is socially immoral and therefore the life should continue. You can't see the doctor is actually doing something against his medical ethics because a doctor has to save a patient at any cost. And state has no interest there or a party to it because it is an obligation which a doctor extends to a patient who does not want to live a life without any dignity. So this is how they have handled all the three. So now there is a procedure called advance directives. What happens? It's a conversation. It's a debate because it's a very critical moment. I mean, only when we confront a life situation, we'll come to really know how each one will take a call. So there is a procedure called advance directives before passive euthanasia. Passive euthanasia is a conclusion. It's a tail end of the destination point. So it precedes a few steps. When a patient is conscious, patient is capable, then the patient has a right to sign a document called advance directives, enabling or facilitating the doctor and the hospital to say, I can be allowed to die my life with dignity. It is a fundamental right I have under Article 21. So this advance directive, based on Vishaka, Supreme Court formulated a set of principles and made it very clear that it shall stay on board till such time a legislation is in place. So this advance directive is for what? It's a very long drawn procedure. I'll leave the slides. Let me not be going point by point, but idea is they want to ensure that somebody in the name of passive euthanasia should not do involuntary, non-voluntary, or even active euthanasia. So this declaration, this format is to ensure that the patient or the conduct of the doctor, the hospital, and the patient through evidence shows that it falls only within the category of passive euthanasia and not active or non-voluntary or involuntary. It's a serious process, how it should be given. So, and it makes it very clear, again, once again, a doctor is entitled to go ahead with this process. A patient may cry out of pain, they say, take my life out. But there is a responsibility attached to the hospital and the doctor, unless it satisfies these 5 criteria, where somebody is terminally ill and the treatment has been prolonging, survival on life support is incurable and there is no hope. There must be a conclusive finding on this 5. If it happens so, then passive euthanasia is your fundamental right. Again, they make it clear. Termination illness, persistently unconscious and end-stage condition. Now, we'll come to the second judgment, which is the LGBT rights. See, this judgment is an important milestone in our constitutional interpretation, milestone in the Supreme Court's history also, because this has brought about a big leap on the terminology progressive and transformative constitutionalism. Of course, it also brings out the doctrine of constitutional morality, which I'll deal it on a separate day as a separate subject, because my views on that are extremely conservative, as many seniors in the Supreme Court have expressed, because we have still not evolved an objective test for constitutional morality. They're all, because every judgment has its own fact and a subject to discuss, and a subjective criteria is being laid down frequently. And therefore, it requires a complete reorientation. Is a personal view, carry. Therefore, I'm not talking about constitutional morality. It's a different subject. But leaving that aside, constitutional morality, transformative is something, how they have handled it, you should see. See, this I've put it judge-wise, so each judge has pronounced a specific view or a line of approach. So one of the judges have said, this should go because equal protection of laws means equal protection of laws without stigma. So somebody under sexual orientation is again a fundamental right coming under the bucket, life, right to live with dignity. These are the 2 basic. Now, this you can have a look at it, and then last 5 minutes we'll develop on this. They have again, the learned judge has again gone about saying that this is something which has remained a stigma, and something which first bullet is in consensual sex, if not allowed, violates right to life and equal protection of the laws. Inclusive society accommodating plural ways of life. This is one important leap when it comes to transformative constitutionalism. Neither can state nor societal notions interfere. Survival as a free society will depend upon whether constitutional values prevail over impulses of time. And society acknowledging injustice is a mark of evolution. So this formed the basis for the learned judge to say this stigma should go from the law. Justice Indu Malhotra again this learned judge has made out a distinction between in homosexuality as a natural variant to human sexuality. From a biological perspective and a psychological perspective, learned judge says both have to be recognized as rights, and made it very clear, as long as it is consensual, it is valid. If forced or coerced or done under duress, then you will not get the protection of the laws. Now, we come to the last section on decriminalization adultery. This is very important for the reason, why did they decriminalize? On what basis did they decriminalize? So you can take this as the basic fulcrum point for an analysis. The learned judge puts the following test. Says, you take the provision, it is not to preserve marriage. It does not appear to preserve marriage, because a man, if he engages himself with an unmarried woman or a widow, then this law doesn't apply. If he has the consent of the husband, then this law doesn't apply. If she has the consent of the person with whom he is interacting with, then it does not tantamount to rape. When you have these three concessions, how do you say marriage is preserved? So it does not go to preserve marriage. It actually makes a woman a chattel, makes the husband a owner, and says if the husband gives his consent to it, then nothing is wrong about it. It looks very dark, very, very primitive, and very, very mediocre. And therefore, giving such a right through a statute should be annulled. This is the basis why it was decriminalized. Now, further points are also added. Who can prosecute? Only the victim or the husband, and not the wife who has committed it. Similarly, so now, the last two bullets, you may have a look at it. We'll discuss it in the last 5 minutes. Marriage, whether it be a sacrament or a contract, does not result in sending an autonomy of one's spouse to another. Sexuality of a woman is a part of her inviolable core. Neither the state nor the institution of marriage can disparage it. Marriage is a significant social institution. Whether the subordination pronounced with the entrenched structures of patriarchy and romantic paternalism, shackling women into less than equal existence. To shackle the sexual freedom of a woman and to allow criminalization on a consensual relationship is a denial of this right. So it is on this basis. So let's consolidate the three: euthanasia, the decriminalization of adultery, and of course the LGBT rights. The bottom line looks to be it is traceable to liberty, dignity, and therefore personal liberty, and therefore right to live. And progressive transformation of constitution. Stigmas should not, when you say somebody is a citizen, somebody cannot be a meek citizen. Somebody cannot be a citizen who can be stigmatized. If you say somebody is a citizen with equal rights, you can't declare a woman to be a chattel of a man. You can't declare, a law cannot declare a husband to be a owner of a woman. So all these interpretations have come over a period of the last 5-6 years, only because privacy was held to be a fundamental right. It all happened only because of that. So the positive development is all this is now part of the mainstream course of law, because they have all become part of the fundamental rights under Article 21. But we as Indians, when we read all these judgments, especially this particular 5 minutes is only for, I've always spent some time on youth and children. It's always my passion to talk something to them whenever we wind up a speech. My only request is, see, right, it all says about sacrament, it talks about contract, it talks about three institutions: family, marriage, and society. All these judgments deal with in extenso. My appeal to the youth is, privacy doesn't mean disrespecting your parents and elders. Don't take that as a fundamental right. It's a request we make to each one of you. See, our first tenet of life, Mata, Pita, Guru, Devam, these four have to be worshipped throughout our life. Don't exercise privacy there. Don't assert that this old man doesn't know anything, I know everything. He may not know what you know, because you have better compatibility in understanding things, better knowledge, and your orientations are all different. All this is conceded, but you don't have to show disrespect. and say that I have a fundamental right under Article 21, even though you may. I'm not saying that you may, because privacy gives you, it says once you, it's an inalienable birthright. So once you are born, you are entitled to be a free person, but exercise caution there. 2, when it comes to again family life, this 4.5 months has taught every human being in this world an invaluable lesson. If somebody will take care of us, it is only our family. Who has taken care of us these 4 months? Society, your friends, or anybody else? Nobody. It's only your family which cares for you. Therefore, family care, it's a unique model, unique successful model India has, Indian tradition has, India value system has. Therefore, whenever it issues relating to family, either interpersonal between a husband and wife or as a family unit, you don't have to assert yourself this fundamental right of privacy beyond a point. Because family unity depends on gives and takes. Family success of family depends on compromises. The beauty of life is giving, yielding, taking, sharing. All these features are part of our value system. So you don't have to corrode it or erode it because you have a right to privacy. And 3, over a period of time, your integration, it very clearly says what is not socially acceptable, what is not socially moral can still be constitutionally acceptable and constitutionally moral. Because when you assert a right, you deal it clinically. So it does say. So when something is within the zone of your privacy, you are not accountable or answerable to anybody. But does not mean, from our standpoint of view, from the value systems which we have inherited, the hoary culture in which we are coming through ages, find out if something is not socially acceptable, whether you can still, it's a choice. See, we are only requesting because you have a fundamental right. So whether the choice should be exercising your right of privacy or aligning yourself with the societal norms. See, one aspect you should understand when it comes to societal formation, the various practices which a society follows are all practices inherited, contributed, treasured, preserved, and perpetuated through lineages, through several generations, and several people have worked to create that societal harmony, create that societal formula. So this is something you have a personal right to distance yourself from it is one aspect, but you don't have a personal right to go and interfere with it or corrode it or destroy it, even though it may be fundamental under 21. It's a request, it's a discussion point, it's a viewpoint I want to discuss with young children and colleagues and young advocates. So when there is a societal norm, marriage, family, and society, don't think your privacy will ensure you a 24/7 into 365 a happy life. COVID has proved it beyond doubt. We need all the 3 in life. And therefore, please exercise caution whenever you want to exercise your fundamental right. With these words, I once again thank all the honorable judges present and past who had been with us in this session, senior counsels, and my dear brothers and sisters, and more importantly, young children and young lawyers. Wish you the very best. Law is a wonderful profession. It makes you live every day a new life. It makes you learn every day something new. So you will always feel very enthusiastic. You can feel very energetic because you are a lawyer. Have that in mind, and my best prayers to each one of you. If there are any questions to take, I'm ready to take it. Otherwise, I once again thank Om Prakash, my good friend Hemlata, and all the participants who have joined us today in good number I deem it a big honor and respect. I do not know whether I have fulfilled your expectations, and I'll continue to improve to the best of my ability whenever the next occasion turns out to be so. Thank you so much. Namaste.
Thank you, sir. We can take a few questions, sir, if any participant,
Yeah, sure.
a few of them raising their hands, or if anybody wants to make it a point, they can also record in the chat box.
Sir, good afternoon, sir.
Yes, Satish.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for a wonderful lecture, sir. You have encapsulated the entire judgments on different perspectives. Sir, my question will be with regard to post-Puttaswamy case. We are concerned more about this data protections because day in and day out, we are using computers. We are feeding our personal data. Many times, though not voluntary, we are compelled to provide. Otherwise, we cannot have access or benefit of those websites. Sir, my query will be, sir, do you feel that post-Puttaswamy, which ensures and reasserts the right of privacy, this information technology laws, as well as this data protection laws, requires a relook?
I think, I'll answer it this way. Before Puttaswamy, the judgments on freedom of expression, see, more than data protection, if you see the judgments on information technology laws, it is more on account of freedom of expression, which is again a right under 19, not necessarily traceable to 21. But the courts have gone fairly, very liberally on freedom of expression. And in the process, whether to what extent you are entitled to your privacy becomes one subject matter. This is one angle. I've always felt that's one angle which we need to converge. One. Post Puttaswamy, maybe, see, they also make it very clear. You have to balance, Puttaswamy also says, between privacy and communitarian values. That's the expression used by the 5 judges in the other case. So it's a question of fact. You can't lay down, you can't put a provision one way or the other. It has to be tested on a case-to-case basis. The balance between privacy and communitarian values. If your disclosure satisfies the requirement of communitarian values, then privacy will have to take a backseat. If your disclosure need not have to meet that communitarian values for specific reasons, then privacy will dominate. This balance has been created, fortunate. It was not there in 9 judges. See, the one reservation I've always expressed when you read the 9 judges is, it was a doctrinal approach on whether privacy is a fundamental right, which they all in unison said it is. But every fundamental right also goes with its own duties, obligations, and restrictions. So that it was left uncapped because it was a doctrinal approach. When it came to Aadhaar, that was capped. And Supreme Court said, you must read privacy is always subservient to communitarian values. If you're able to prove your case under that logic, then privacy will take a backseat.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, sir. As usual, a wonderful session with a clear message. My point is, the provisions of the Constitution, be it Article 21 or all other articles, stand as it is. They have not been amended. And it is the innovative approach of the Supreme Court, which each and every case find out, say, a different panoramic view and comes out with different interpretations to meet the requirements of the time. Do you see it as the success of the Supreme Court and the responsive approach of the Supreme Court to meet the requirements of the time that they are doing it? It's a success. Do you see it as a success? Or do you see it as a failure? Like, unless you do this, you cannot meet the expectations from the current society and you will become out of place. So day by we have to dilute and we have to give more and more by way of. So do you see it as success or do you see it as a failure? And what is the message in that, sir?
It's not a question of success or failure. We need to understand the caution. Once we understand the caution, then you can discern yourself as to what it is. See, both transformative constitutionalism and also constitutional morality, which forms the trigger for major changes that is happening, at least in the recent decade. The core objective is very, very important. If it, as long as, see, I have a slightly divided view, but I'll still share it. It's my personal view at this point. See, you have to accept the fact. But for the interpretation nuanced into Article 21, courts would not have become so relevant. Of course, courts are burdened because of that today. In fact, Nani Palkiwala-ji, when he argued the first set of public interest litigation opposed this, he said before the Andhra Pradesh High Court, why are you admitting this animal? You will find yourself being tied out. You will find yourself being caught into this mess at one point of time. That was the caution he uttered in his first of his few cases. But we have to move with times. It has proved that many a times this has brought people who cannot afford justice, can't think of justice, people who can't think of their rights being assimilated as part of fundamental rights. Courts have done it. So it is something which is a phenomenal success. You can't say that. Now, two, it is done through judicial activism. Courts have again and again said, no, we are not judicial activists when it comes to Article 21. We are only discerning what is available. We are only interpreting right to life. We are only interpreting personal liberty. Therefore, all these judgments have found its asylum in any one of these two expressions. But three, when it comes to personal rights, which is of a recent origin, this has galloped and increased phenomenally because of this doctrine of transformative constitutionalism and constitutional morality. Euthanasia, it may be, see, the three judgments which I cited may be on justifiable circumstances. But even there, certain, how does the modern mind and a young mind takes privacy? That capping should have also been done along with the judgment is only a suggestion. It's only a viewpoint. So we'll have to wait and see over a period of time. These are all formative years and it has come through well. We'll have to wait and see how personal liberties shape in our human society as a value system under Article 21 over a period of time. We'll have to wait and watch. Otherwise, this has produced phenomenal success and phenomenal results. The door of public interest litigation, transforming what was stated as a director principles of state policy as a fundamental right. All this could not have been possible but for the initiative taken by the judiciary in encompassing all within life, right to live and personal liberty.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Murli.
Very excellent session, sir. We hear it as a junior members of the bar. We have enlightened all this Article 21. Now I have two questions. My second question depends on your answer to my first question. It is not directly related to your topic under Article 221, but it is a common topic. I want to have an answer from you. Sir, what is the significance of entrusting powers under Article 226 and 32 of the Constitution of India to High Courts and the Supreme Court alone to protect the fundamental rights? Why these powers are not shared or entrusted with the lower judiciary for expedience and costless justice, sir?
See, I mean, we have all inherited the British system, and yes, the High Court, a writ is a constitutional remedy, and therefore, the discretion can be exercised only by a constitutional court, and therefore it is confined only to High Courts and the Supreme Court, which need not be found fault with at this moment. So you can decide whether to ask the second question or not.
Sir, because the reason for my first question is that it is for a common man's interest only I have asked that question.
Yeah.
While we are appointing, while the Constitution provides to appoint senior advocates as a judges for the High Courts, why the same method adopts in the District Court also? And it may be very useful for the common man to approach the District Court in a friendly manner.
See,
for that purpose.
What happens? See, then slowly you expand it. Slowly you give it to the lower judiciary. Why not we give it to the executive? Why not quasi-judicial authority squash income tax assessment orders under Article 226? Where is the limit? So constitutional powers, it's a responsibility. It is more to do with judicial responsibility. It is not that lower courts are not judicially responsible. They have a different domain to operate. So this is a constitutional domain, and we should leave it to the constitutional court to decide. That's healthy. And with this, we find so much of burden being the biggest litigant to be is the government. All of us know. And therefore, to say that we should decentralize it may not augur a required result. We need to amend the constitution and infuse constitutional powers to everybody. That may not. Giving power is not an issue. But with power, what do you do? The efficacy and effects of such power needs to be thought over. It's not that simple.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, good afternoon, sir.
Namaste.
So whenever I hear a lecture from you, in many of the YouTube, I feel that some defense power is speaking to me. Such a wonderful lecture, sir. Sir, my question is that in the ADM Jabalpur case, Justice H.R. Khanna said that despite suspension of Article 21 of the Constitution, the rights of citizens are inherited in the procedural laws. Therefore, mere suspension would not preclude a citizen from approaching the Supreme Court or High Court for habeas corpus. Then what was the idea of the framers of the Constitution to employ the same as procedure established by law? Whether that term is employed or not, that is not according to Justice H.R. Khanna. Though it was a minority view on that time. Later in 44th Amendment, that has become the law of the land. Therefore, I would like to know from you, what was the reason this term was employed in that article?
See, I mean, I will avoid the angle relating to criminal law because I've not done even any cases in criminal. In fact, first time I did as becoming an ASG, I had to do one preventive detention. You would not know, I did not sleep the whole night. and 2-3, including a retired judge, I spoke and I took so much of help because I wanted to be very clear that I don't misstate something before a court of law. It's an important forum. Therefore, I don't want to travel. I've caveated myself from this, yes. And you should excuse me in. But basically, when it comes to now due process versus procedure established by law, now the interpretation post Menaka Gandhi, Minerva Mills, and now Puttasamy, 9 judges, is that procedure should be not an arbitrary but fair, transparent, and reasonable. If it is not fair, transparent, and reasonable, then courts are empowered to interfere with. This was the concern of the constitutional makers in 1950, to give that power to judiciary or not. And even recently, Honorable Justice Nagesh Rao, the Supreme Court, has delivered a lecture on this judicial review to the Bangalore Association of Lawyers. You should hear it. It's a wonderful talk. So that will give you some idea about why these two terms were debated upon and how courts, over a period of time, silently and politely have ensured that the power is vested ultimately with the court. Because that is one of the fundamental rights, which is what Puttasamy says. It is not enough if you pass laws. Laws are there to protect. But if they don't protect, so the judicial body has to declare that it is not protecting you, and to this effect, this law is null and void. That power is always only with our judiciary. That's the biggest power envisaged by the Constitution, is what this interpretation of Puttasamy and several other judgments post Menaka Gandhi seeks to say.
A very enlightening lecture, but I thought I could ask you a personal view of yours, because I feel of late, after the Constitution was passed, we are recognizing privacy as a fundamental right and all that. You think that we are going away from our tradition and culture that we have built in India so many years and moving towards a European society in the name of civil liberty and all that, too much of independent civil liberty, which is curtailed against the society. How the right of the society in Puttasamy is put up. I just want to know how the right of individual against the society's right is taken care.
So I think the 3 judgments which I discussed, or necessary judgments when it comes to right to life and right to human dignity. And I also expressed my concern. We'll have to wait and see. More than the courts, see, 1 minute. Courts in all these judgments have expressed those reservations, have expressed their concern. All that courts have said in the judgments. We will have to wait and see how the neoliberal society of India is going to emerge, and how they are going to, and how courts are going to react at that point of time. So when I made a request the last 5-7 minutes to my young brothers and sisters, I made it from as a request as a parent to them. And I'm also making a request to learned judges. Whenever there is an occasion for you to discuss a right of privacy, let us not compromise or yield our values and tradition. Please infuse. This is again part of when right to life, also right to dignity, also empowers one to live with their own convictions, traditions, and structures. And these are all inherited over millenniums of years. Therefore, we should not give up. That is very clear. Court has not said you give up. So we should not assume courts have asked us to give up. That's also not correct. But we'll have to wait and watch in the future India and the future interpretation. Both citizens have a responsibility, and so do the courts when it comes to interpreting personal liberties. That was the caution I also expressed as my personal view.
Sir, while I accept that, my point is, supposing today the court have given some verdict, once it is practiced by the society, once right acquired, nobody will give up. Can we change this society again back?
We can't.
How self-restrained? If India has self-restrained, we could have achieved many things. That is not the practice.
See, I will see it this way. I'll answer your question this way from a legal perspective. More than privacy, privacy is one aspect. What is more concerning the free India, the new India, is the freedom of expression. Article 19. So whether it is slowly becoming unlimited through social media, social network. So the freedom to express. See, you are a right. Nobody can question your right, the right of freedom to express. Because you must know what you're expressing. You must be thorough with what you're expressing. That is fundamental. That is missing over a period of time. Now, what everyone says, I don't have to know anything, but I can express my view. So you dump the society with so much of information. You do not know which information is an information which has basis, which information has no basis, because anybody has a right to speak. This is going to be an area of concern in future. The more than privacy, courts should slowly concentrate and start to monitor freedom of expression, as it should slowly set caps and say that if somebody says I have a freedom of expression, they cannot get away if they have view expressed by them is materially wrong. Now, what does the new democracy say? I need not be right, but I'm entitled to express my view. So what does it mean? I'm entitled to express a wrong view, because that view should also be in society. So how do you generate this as a fundamental right? So to generate a wrong view is a fundamental right. Freedom of expression includes to generate a wrong view. So accountability becomes a factor. So the future of India needs to be shaped, and the judiciary has a large role to play, according to me, more in the area of freedom of expression, and secondly, in the area of privacy. We'll have to wait and watch how the next 15-20 years span out in the hands of our judges.
Sir, one supplementary question. Kindly bear with me, sir. You are recognizing all this right without a level playing field. You don't even recognize education as compulsory or a fundamental right for every citizen of this country.
Fundamental right. They have said education is a fundamental right. Unni Krishnan. They have said education is a fundamental right. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishwanath, sir. Sir, I unmuted Mr. Anirudh.
Sir, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you, Anirudh.
Sir, very good morning. So my question is based on right to privacy. Sir, banks giving the databases of their customer to a third party and many bank frauds happening due to this. Isn't this a violation to right to privacy, sir?
See, as long, I mean, I don't know the documentation. If there is a document which prohibits you, after all, your data without your knowledge cannot be shared. And unless otherwise, it is a data of public importance or of a national security or those criteria. And therefore, if it doesn't fall under those criteria and if it is shared, I think you should object to it.
Thank you, sir. Sir, before I proceed to the final leg of our session of rendering a vote of thanks, I only thought, though there are so many compliments in the chat box, two of them would be of something which I can put it across to you because it is from the law students. One, Mr. V. Harish. I am a law student from Chennai. Thank you, sir. It was very useful. And you had Mr. Vijay Krishnan. Good noon, sir. Myself being a student of law, I found the session very precise, concise, and on point. Further, your way of articulation was very beautiful and capturing. The session was very inspiring, sir. Thank you.
I'm so happy that you can touch the hearts of youngsters. I feel obliged, and thank you so much for the nice compliments. Let me keep improving as much as possible.
Now I am left with the toughest obligation of rendering a vote of thanks. I am at loss of words as to what I have to say, sir, as a thanks to you for having agreed to be part of the session, enlightening the lawyers, enlightening the members of the bar, enlightening the youngsters, law students as to a very interesting topic. You had taken us through the entire landscape of the legal judgments on Article 21, starting from A.K. Gopalan. At the same time, you gave us a very wonderful spectrum as to how these judgments over the period of developed. When we speak about LGTB rights, it is always displayed in terms of colors which are there. So you really took us to the spectrum of judgments, and the pinnacle of these things were the 4 judgments which you have taken and you have put it across to the members in the session in a very, very simple manner as to how we could look at those judgments, how we have to take in the right words. Because of late, personally, I feel this voluminous judgments as becoming a concern. You read, ultimately you don't know where you have to pick up the point, where you have to miss out. So in those times, it had been wonderful hearing you on those 4 judgments and putting across to us the essentials of those judgments. And finally, when you said about what is law and what is a life of a lawyer, it was amazing. There could not have been a very better words to tell an youngster or tell a lawyer to feel proud of being a lawyer, feel enjoyable. You said the right word, saying that it is the happiest moment, happiest times being a lawyer and learning the law. Thank you very much, sir. Thanks for having participated. Thanks for having enlightened. It's from my heart, on behalf of all the members of the study circle, we extend a very, very hearty thank you for having given this wonderful session to us, sir. Thank you very much. I thank each of the participants for having participated. Very many senior advocates who are there, and all other participants who have spared this wonderful Sunday morning to listen to this wonderful lecture. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much. Kind of you, please. Namaste.